Okay, welcome to May 31st session. We are on page 118, beginning with chapter 7, Humanity and Culture. Is someone willing to pray for us before we begin tonight? Great.
Father, thank you for bringing us together again, and I pray that you would be with us in our discussion tonight, and we would just thank you for meeting with us, and may we learn something new this evening that you are sending to us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. For this section of our study, I'm going to be using the fourth definition of the word culture as defined by Webster's dictionary. It states here the characteristic features of a civilization, including its beliefs, its artistic and material products, and its social institutions. Humans have a unique ability to do exactly that. Whereas animals have an instinctual behaviors and habits, humans have the potential to create and build life around them. Have you personally witnessed a widely variant culture among various human groups? Where? That's an open question for you all.
Yeah, well, I had an African student, and it was really big for them to do hair, spend hours doing their hair, and it was just something they did. And
Yeah.
she brought that with her, and she would spend hours on the weekend putting extensions in, and she always just looked tripped out. She was a beautiful young woman inside and out.
Cool.
It was nice to see, yeah.
Yeah, if I spend 30 seconds on my hair, it's a world record.
I hear ya. I'm with you on that one.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, when we moved to Florida,
Oh my.
we were used to being punctual, and some of those people's definition of punctual was being within 2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
When we wanted to come back after 3 years of seminary and graduate and everything else, wanted to come back, most of the people in Florida said, "Why do you want to go back to Siberia and go back to that frozen tundra?" We couldn't wait to get back because the culture was so radically different. I couldn't work with the people. They were just irresponsible. Sorry, people in Florida. I went to my field education director, who had set me up with the church and got me the position as youth and children's pastor at this church. And I said, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong." He says, I can't get people to be responsible. They sign up for crafts. They never show up. They sign up. We say we have a 9:30 meeting. They don't come to 11. And he started laughing. I said, "This isn't funny. I'm trying to do ministry." And he laughed. He says, "People come to Central Florida for one of two reasons, either to party or to die. And they don't care about being responsible for a church." And that proved to be true. And so Gene and I couldn't wait to get back to the Midwest, because for 95% of the time, if somebody says they're going to do something, they do it. And they're on time, and they're punctual, and they're responsible. That is not the case in Central Florida. Big difference in culture. I find it really, really fascinating that human beings, all created in the likeness and image of God, have such a huge, wide variety of cultures. I mean, Lacey, you're in Kenya, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Kenyan culture is radically different than American culture. When went to Guatemalan culture is radically different than American culture. I spent some time in Haiti, and Haiti's even different than Guatemalan culture, and is different than American culture. And even...
We went to New York City,
Oh.
and everybody's passing us because I'm like, "What? Get out of my way!" Because we were going slow there.
Walking slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how human beings have such a wide range of cultures and wide range of expressing themselves within that culture. Cardinals are pretty much cardinals no matter where you go in the world. They're territorial when they're nesting, and they seem to get together during the winter, and that's the way they are pretty much everywhere. Human beings are not that way. Thoughts? That's what we're looking at. Someone read that quote by Leonard Verduin.
There's no civilization on the animal level because there's no cultural heritage. The normal thing for man's cultural heritage is to grow and increase. The normal thing for a civilization is to advance. But the movement is not necessarily forward and upward. There can also be a decay in culture and backsliding in civilization. But even these are peculiarly human. Fluctuation, whether upward or downward, occurs only in human society.
Thoughts on that quote? We are constantly changing. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Phyllis.
I think we're going down as a culture.
Oh, I think the American culture is on a skids right now.
Something's
On a
wrong.
greased mountain. Gene and I pray pretty regularly that God will intervene in our nation and cause a revival to help us to turn around, because this direction we're in is not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. One of the really, I don't know if you guys ever had contact with the Moody Bible Science videos that were really popular in the 60s and early 70s. They made a bunch of videos that talked about social and scientific principles and how they were all related to God and related to the Bible. They were fascinating. But they had one called Empty Cities that was really, really fascinating. And it looked at civilization's rise and fall, and they looked at the peak and what happened at that peak that caused them to fall. And almost inevitably, they adopted some type of either social or religious or cultural habit that was against God. And from that point on, that culture was on the skids. It was absolutely fascinating to look at that and see how that played out. And it's playing out in our country as well. Other thoughts? Let's go on. In this chapter, we will look at the unique cultural developments humans make in the areas of education, entertainment, technology, the arts, zeitgeist. Everybody use that word? You learned that word in school? Oh, we got beat that. My English teacher beat that into our...
Really?
Oh, yes. Zeitgeist is the spirit of the age. Really important concept to understand, because there's been a huge shift in the spirit of our age, a huge shift in the zeitgeist in America. Whereas in the 50s, it was family and work and security and financial freedom, those kind of things. Now it's doing what I want to do. It's narcissism. It's a whole different focus that's created a lot of the chaos that we're looking at in America. In fact, the book that I've mentioned several times, Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman, talks a lot about how that zeitgeist, that spirit of the age, has just taken over, and it's gotten even worse since he wrote the book. Okay, going on. And government. Christianity has encouraged huge strides in developing progressing culture towards human flourishing in those nations in which Christianity was allowed to be unhindered and publicly practiced. In fact, I would encourage you to turn back to the back of this study, chapter 18, pages, actually it's 116 and 117, for an extensive list of cultural advancements that have come to be part of cultures where Christianity has thrived. Anybody taking a look at that list?
I just,
Good. What's on it?
well, now I go back.
Okay.
Stuff like women's rights,
Good.
abolition of slavery. was
Good.
there.
Those are the biggies.
Yeah. Just a appreciation of the arts.
Good.
Beauty itself.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to read people that are cultural experts, and how the Arabian people don't have an appreciation for the arts. They just don't. I find that absolutely fascinating. That it's a Western civilization feature that the good, the true, and the beautiful are much more a priority among Western civilization than they are Eastern. Well, not Eastern as much as Middle Eastern. Other things on that list, Lacey, while you got it there.
Well, I'm there. So like hospitals, universities.
Good! Stop at that one.
Okay.
Hospitals used to be solely in control of churches. They were started by churches, they were controlled by churches. Why? Why would hospitals be a concern of churches?
We care about people.
Yes! Why would they be concerned about people?
Because God wants us to.
They're made in the image of God.
Good! Christians and the Judeo-Christian worldview looks at people as being created in the image and likeness of God, and so therefore they're valuable inherently. Mother Teresa's work in India was revolutionary for the Indian people. A lot of those people in that town in, it wasn't Calcutta. Was it Calcutta?
I thought it was.
Maybe it was. Would said, let them die. And Mother Teresa said, no, they're created in God's likeness. In fact, she had a really, really radical approach. See, she said, because this person, maybe they had tuberculosis, but they're a week away from dying. She said, because they're created in God's likeness and image, that's Christ to me. So how would I treat Christ? If that was Christ there dying of tuberculosis, I would take him in and do whatever I could to make his life as manageable and painless as possible and comforting as much as I could. And that was her attitude with all of her patients. And that had a radical impression upon the people of India, because that was not done with people that were sick. You let them die. Thoughts? Go ahead.
I suppose that's spun out of the hospice movement there. That came from the same idea.
Yes, and care for Down syndrome babies, physical disability people, mentally handicapped people. All of those had Christian beginnings and had Christian people that were pioneering taking care of those kind of cases. Up until, I remember reading a Middle Ages story about a king that was on boy, you're not going to like this story at all. A king was on a hunting expedition, and one of the slaves was going along to manage the camp and all those kind of things, and his hands were cold. He took the slave and cut him from here to here open and put his hands inside of his innards to warm his hands. Because that's all that slave was good for, was warming his hands in the innards of that slave. That was the mindset of people in non-Christian Middle Ages. We can't imagine that. I could tell you another one that's even worse, but you don't want to go there. But I remember reading these things and thinking, wow, how could people think that? Well, a lot of people thought that's why the Romans could put Christians in the arena for sport and watch them as entertainment.
People came to watch it.
Yeah, it was public entertainment.
So how can people kill a live baby as it's being born?
That is a good question.
How is that any more gross?
It's not any different.
Yeah.
That's a good question, which we'll come to that in just a little bit, if I remember right. Let's go ahead. Somebody read the quote by Glenn Sunshine there.
Until fairly recently, Christians worked to apply the biblical understanding of what it means to be human to the full range of human experience. The result was the transformation of work, the development of technology, the rise of science, the idea of human rights, the abolition of slavery, improvement of the status of women, promotion of monogamy, the creation of great art, and a host of other elements that shaped Western civilization and created the modern world.
Good summary statement of the impact that the Christian worldview has had on culture. Let's go on.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I guess all this has me thinking. So when the tabernacle was first built, was having the intricate designs and stuff in that unique for the Israelites compared to the other cultures around them? Or, because it seems like the Egyptians had a lot of...
The kind of things that were displayed were unique. The fact that there was a lot of artwork that went into the temple was not unique.
Okay.
The Greeks, to this
Well, yeah,
day...
but that was a lot later, wasn't? Weren't Greeks later than...
No. Whoa, you're right.
Because we're talking like 1500 BC.
Yeah, Greeks would have been about 300 to 450 BC.
Ray Vanderline said that a lot of the Hebrew slaves that went in the Exodus were artisans in Egypt.
Yeah.
So
maybe that was
they were skilled already, yeah.
got inspired from the beginning, like from, because just, talking about that, and he mentions that the quote we just read about the importance of appreciating art and stuff and that. Yeah.
What's really, really fascinating I don't know, I may have mentioned this before, but the first mention of the Spirit moving someone to do something comes where?
In Exodus, when he has the artisan
Making the temple.
yeah, and
The Spirit moved these artisans to make the things in the temple. That's the first mention that the Spirit is moving in a human being. We have the Spirit moving in Genesis 1:2, but only upon the face of the deep in order to brood over it, is actually the Hebrew word, over the deep there. But the first biblical mention of the Spirit of God moving a person to do something is of the artisans. I think that's huge.
Well, if you look at nature, I mean, God's just got beauty everywhere. So he likes, if we're created in God's image, we should like beauty.
And I think that's what the temple was supposed to remind the worshipers when they came of God's creation. Strictly forbidden was any images of people or humans or any godlike image at all. It was all nature things. One of the really fascinating things is the cathedral in Barcelona, Spain, that's been ongoing for the last 160 years and still isn't done. But that
Sounds like our county courthouse.
that architect and artist wanted to incorporate all sorts of nature things, like turtles that had big shells and columns coming off their backs to support a huge area. I mean, it's just wonderful imagination, but it all pointed to God's creation. And it's really pretty stunning to come and worship there, because it's reminding you of the God of the universe and all the really cool things God has. And I think the temple originally was created to do that. Going on, skipping a couple questions. What do you speculate was a core doctrine within the teaching of Christianity that was probably, we've talked about that. What other cultural developments need to occur in 21st century America in order for us to truly love our neighbor? What things do we need to pursue? Jan? You mentioned it about 3 minutes ago.
Well, not killing babies?
Yes!
Yeah.
It's unthinkable that we have become so casual and so cavalier about the killing of...
I think the respect for life, human life,
Yes.
is above that.
Yeah.
You're right.
With gang violence and drive-by shootings and there's
Human
just,
trafficking.
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
the disrespect for human life is just,
Wow.
We used to have it in this nation. That was one of the things that promoted the abolition of slavery. That was what promoted women's rights. That's what promoted racial rights in the 50s and 60s. We have lost it. And I am convinced that the humanistic and Darwinistic worldviews that's been shoved down the throats of our educational system for the last 180? No, that can't be right. Wow, 180
where are you
years.
going back to?
Darwin.
Darwin is 1860.
About 150, 60.
1860.
Yeah,
1860.
50, 60.
160 years. So, teaching Darwinism for 160 years, I think it's finally starting to catch hold within the culture. And people are starting to actually believe that that's what we are and acting accordingly. So we don't act as human beings with an ethical basis, because that would require a transcendent God giving us an ethical basis. So how do we respond if we're just animals that come out of the primitive life? What would be our cultural, what would be our attitude towards life?
Survival.
What is it?
Survival.
Absolutely. I do whatever I need to do in order to get the edge on my neighbor, do whatever I need to do in order to get my way, do whatever I need to do in order to survive. And I think it's starting to take hold. And if we don't change that attitude and go back to a Christian worldview, I think it's going to get worse.
Isn't that just the basic instinct that we have, though? That's at the beginning, the bottom of your brain. I mean, that's what you first...
Absolutely. What does the Apostle Paul say about that basic instinct?
It's our old self that we need to kill.
What does he say about it?
Kill it.
You need to kill that old nature. Yeah. No, you're exactly right, Phyllis. That's a part of our natural self that Christianity says has to die. That's what it means to die and come to Christ. You say no to that old nature. Thoughts?
I think as a culture, we also need to allow ourselves to be repulsed by ourselves. Like, look in the mirror and realize, wait, I'm material.
Wow, Lacey, it's amazing you're saying that.
Why are you picking on her like that?
She knows why. Don't you?
No, I don't. Is it my age group? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
You're dark soul and you're.
That's fair.
I guess I don't know her well enough.
You don't know her well enough. You understand now, right?
Yeah. I know that's being a young adult.
They can all think I'm terrible, but you and I understand.
And everybody that's watching this video is just.
They don't care.
For a period of time, Lacey, if you'd say black, she'd say, like my soul.
Or white, or blue, or pink.
Yeah.
Rick, please get us help.
I was just thinking, it's like, we talk about the world upside down,
Oh, wow.
and what used to be important was life, and now it's at the bottom. And what we talked about, survival, whatever, survival of the fittest is what it is. And
His risen's the top.
yeah.
Wow. And listen, folks, the kingdom of God is upside down from what the world, from our natural instincts, from what Phyllis talked about, our natural base self. And well, we'll come to that a little bit later on as well. And it's gonna appear offensive to the rest of the culture, to the rest of the world, because it is upside down. It's not natural thinking. It's supernatural thinking.
That's why you were just talking about how can they kill babies? It's really easy. There's no importance in
Yeah.
It's my right.
that. Exactly.
I feel that they're
You shouldn't be
superior.
surprised at all why it's easy for them to kill.
And you know, a few years ago, I remember the Christians were looking at, wow, this whole thing of abortion is going to become a non-subject, a non-discussion, because science is so close to being able to prove when life begins. And the more that they could have that evidence, we thought the more that people would realize, oh, that is a life and you don't kill, and yet we were kind of heading that direction for just a short amount of time. And then all of a sudden, the value of life became so much more disrespected that very quickly didn't matter.
Exactly.
You can prove it or
They
not.
can't disprove that it is life, so then they had to change the argument, in my opinion.
Oh,
that they-
yeah.
that-
No, they changed your whole approach.
Yeah, because.
Used to be that
Right,
approach.
but then once they couldn't argue against that, because it was so obvious, because the science
Yeah.
showed it was a life, they couldn't use that argument anymore, so then they had to admit that, yeah, we're killing a life, but mine's more important, so I can.
Yeah, so then,
Yeah.
then they start focusing on
Yes.
the woman just has the right to choose,
Yep.
and it doesn't matter that there's a baby involved.
So who
yeah.
are we talking about when we say they?
People that support abortion.
Yeah, but I'm saying, even some people in younger ages, if you're not taught the value of life, you grow up with that same mentality.
Sure.
And it doesn't even matter sometimes. I've seen even in some Christian groups.
Oh, yeah.
Well, some children are not valued in their own home,
Oh,
so they feel it growing up.
Absolutely.
My parents
What-
don't value me. They're beating me all the time.
Well, there were rules to protect dogs and laws before there were laws to protect children.
That's what upsets me so about this matter, is people are just so into your humane society, taking care of animals and rescuing them
And not children.
versus
Yeah,
people.
but it's not cool to rescue.
It's not
It's
cool to
funny.
rescue people.
What's
You get
really funny
arrested.
is working with the
Yeah.
funeral home, most people, because when I do pre-needs with people and plan them, most of them I say, so, you know, in the plan, I might say, what's your favorite charity? You know, if somebody wants to leave a memorial, I say, oh, probably the Humane Society.
Yeah.
And I want to say, well, what about Right to Life? That would be a good one. I say that, because I don't dare, but it's just so easy to.
Wow.
Yeah, people love
You
animals.
read your obituaries, most of them are
Yeah.
Humane Society.
I've noticed
Probably
that
3/4 of them.
most of them that have no funeral, it's the Humane
Yeah,
Society.
yeah.
Wow.
Let's carry on. Bottom of 118. Someone read that quote by Francis Schaeffer and C. Everett Koop, who, by the way, was.
A Surgeon General.
Yeah, good for you, Sharon.
Nice.
Surgeon General during the Reagan era, if I remember right. Someone read that quote.
Cultures can be judged in many ways, but eventually every nation in every age must be judged by this test. How did it treat people?
Wow.
Each generation, each wave of humanity evaluates its predecessors on this basis. The final measure of mankind's humanity is how humanely people treat one another.
Huge. Huge, 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 huge.
What's so ironic though is we have such a range in our country too. Because in some ways, I'm so proud of our culture that we take better care of the special needs people
Yep.
than we ever have.
Right.
And that's to be celebrated. That is a
Absolutely.
great thing. But how can we do that? But yet, yeah, it's not consistent. But I'm glad we're making some positives and not all negatives.
We are a culture rife with inconsistencies.
Yeah.
You can have a traffic accident and a mother can be pregnant and the baby die as a result of the accident and they can be charged for murder. But you can take and make a choice to go in and have it surgically removed and you're encouraged and protected to make sure that that baby dies.
This is a push, but we've just come out of the celebration, the focus, the month for child abuse. We had all the blue and white little twirly things were all over.
I missed them.
And, they're up and down the road. They were down at the courthouse and everything. So what is that? What was the name of the month? It's Child Abuse Awareness Month or something
okay.
like that. Okay. And so you've got your Child Protective Services, I guess, where there was a government agency really pushing that. It's all over the place. And every time I saw those, I'm thinking, that's interesting. It's the United States government has an office that's really making sure people know that we're fighting child abuse. And yet it's the United States government that's bringing children across the border for trafficking, for human trafficking. And I'm just going, there's a conflict there. All month, every time I saw those, that's what went through my head. I know.
Let's go on to 119. What would it be some indicators that a cultural movement was bad for culture or society?
How it treats humans.
Good? I'm thinking of other things that.
Which question are you on?
The third one down on 119. What would be some indicators that a cultural movement was bad for cultural society?
If it goes against the Bible.
Okay.
The society is going to be degrading.
Good. How does that manifest itself? Rick, do you remember when we were in Guatemala? Was it when we were down there or was it later? The guy we went down to help. York.
Yes, Yorks.
What's his first name? Irv, thank you. Irv York kept cash in his glove compartment because if he got pulled over, he could buy off the cops during your time.
Yeah.
And not have anything against him. And it didn't necessarily mean that he was a violation. It just meant the cop wanted some money. So he kept money in the glove compartment for that purpose only, to buy off the cop if he got stopped. Is that good for society?
No.
What's wrong with that picture?
You're encouraging it.
Encouraging what?
Do it to others.
Bribery.
Bribery?
Breaking
Good.
the law, and
It'd be
you just
another-
pay them off so that you can break the law.
Exactly. What else are they
But
encouraging?
it sounds like though, a lot of times, like Irv would not be breaking the law. But the
He-
police officer is wanting money, so he stops him and he will make up a charge against him.
Sure. But,
Just so
but
he gets money, but Irv pays him and then he doesn't.
Doug's point is just as valid too, because
Yeah, it could be either
you
way.
could do it either way, yeah.
But the value of money was more important than people.
Or justice.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Because justice, having a good justice system is reflected to your value for people. Because in order to have people thriving and people to be free and people to live in prosperity and security, you have to have a good justice system. They have to have a non-perverted and non-corrupt justice system. Folks, we're losing that. It was shocking to go to Haiti and see how they live there, and to hear Irv say that he had to keep money in his glove compartment in order to buy it. I thought, wow, I'm not sure I can live this way. I mean, I've gotten so used to things being right that if I was 7 over, I deserve a ticket, you know? If I'm not 7 over, I can fight my case and I can have the judicial system that will be there and I can hear my case, you know? But folks, when that's thrown out the window and you have no justice, how can you live that way? You can't. Not with security and not with the idea of prosperity. I really feel horrible for my brother-in-laws, Gene's brothers. They're involved in organic farming. They're involved in a huge hog operation. But the rules change about every 2 or 3 years about what the state or what the federal government requires for them for organic farming and for hog raising and those kind of things. Folks, these barns and your system and everything else are set up for years in advance and projected out. And to have the rules for the game to change 2 years into your 20-year program, how can you live that way? They do it all the time. In fact, they have a lawyer hired that does nothing but warn them, this is coming down the pike, you need to be aware of this. My dad never had a lawyer hired. He just went out and planted the crops and sold them to the market.
That's what happened about 2 or 3 years ago. Most people may not even know about it, but chickens. They had to change, all the big producers had to change their coops.
I remember that, yeah.
So they were free range, but they weren't cages anymore. So it revolutionized. That's why eggs went up so high, because they had to change all their barns. And,
Yeah.
And it was just a problem for them. I mean, people that were fighting it didn't realize that the chicken's never been happier to have everything he wants. Just because he doesn't have, I mean, our chickens run free, but they have to do that with the
If you got 5,000 chickens.
So, I mean, they've got all the food they want, they got all the water they want, but the people just think they weren't happy. Those eggs weren't happy, so.
Growing up on a chicken farm, because chickens are mean to each other, you know? They'll pick on one until it's dead.
That's why they cut their beaks. That's why they cut all the beaks when they're born.
You can watch one poor chicken get pecked all day long.
Yeah. Does we're being nice to the chickens.
It reflects, it kind of goes back to how animals are valued more than people.
Sure.
And it's just a way to put farming out of business. Keep costing them more and more money it's just, I think there's twofold focus on that.
Well, if they do that, we'll have no food, Jen.
I know, that's it. See, people are not important. People don't need food. People don't need to live. They can die. They don't care.
Well, there are certain philosophers and sociologists and politicians that believe we need to whittle down the population about a third in order to make the world a better place to live. And so if a third of us die, that was just
stated again by
Was it really?
billionaires. He said, we need to have another pandemic. We need to kill we need to get rid of about 9 more million people.
Yeah, COVID didn't kill enough.
Yeah. And it was.
This is the world we live in, folks. And I really think it's going to get worse because we've lost the Christian worldview that values human life and goes to the great lengths with helping out disabled people, helping out mentally challenged people, and those kind of things, to say that life is important, and it's going to get more and more survival of the fittest. I really believe. Okay, let's go on. We're going to skip quite a bit. Next to the last quote there by Francis Schaeffer and C. Everett Koop again. It was a materialistic world.
It was the materialistic worldview that brought in humanity. It must be a different worldview that drives it out.
Yeah, I really think it's going to be the Christians. We're going to have to step up to the plate. We're going to have to show the world a better way in order to make a change in the culture. And the more we become a global culture, the more it's going to be hard to do that. But we have a lot of tools at our disposal that they didn't have 300 years ago. The internet, we have popular means of communication, we have popular means of being able to communicate with third world countries where a lot of change can take place there that actually can affect the rest of the world if the more we become global. Thoughts?
Although they could put us back in the Colosseums too.
And that's in a distinct, the book of Revelation says that that's exactly what's going to happen.
I was going to say earlier, can you imagine everything's going like this now with Christians here? If there is a rapture,
Oh, wow.
Christians are removed from the world, can you imagine how fast it would go down?
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation over the ages if you take the Christian element out, because the Christian element does restrain evil. This is talked about by the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. That, and in fact, a lot of people believe that that's where the rapture takes place, is because our spirit among the world refrains evil from taking place. I don't know how many of you have noticed before, but there can be a conversation going on in which vulgar talk and swearing and stuff going on, and if they know you're a Christian and you come into that presence, it stops.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of influence the Spirit of Christ can have on people. But Gene's right. If that gets taken out everywhere, and people are free to just conduct themselves in whatever base inclinations they have, but as R.C. Sproul used to say, you don't want to be there when that bird begins to sing, because life is going to be really, really bad.
Well, it's interesting because there's an author, I can't remember his name, that ended up committing suicide. One of the books he wrote was called The Road. And some EM pulse or something had knocked out everything electronic, electricity, everything, so that there was now no more food or anything. And the baser human beings that he portrayed in that book were what you're talking about. I mean, they would capture humans to smoke them for food, and if you ran into anybody on the road, you had to really be careful because they were wanting everything you had and you for food. It's just amazing how the people see that in humanity and with no good elements at all.
Other thoughts?
That movie that's out right now is called Kingdom of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what you just talked about.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Huh.
Remind me not to see it. Page 120, education. We're going to lean on Phyllis and Lacey a lot here. Education is a powerful tool. It can be used for good or for evil. Would you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Yes.
So far I see everybody head shaking yes. That's a good sign. What is the purpose or goal of education? Okay, here we go.
Depends on who's running the institution.
Okay, there we go. That's definitely an honest answer. What should be the goal of education?
To teach people how to think.
Ooh.
What to think?
Ooh. Let's read this quote that's by John Stonestreet. Someone read that quote there at top of page 120.
Postmodern thinking in education was disrupting what Chuck Colson called the order of learning instead of recognizing that the right foundations, known as grammar and rhetoric, and classical vision must first be established before children can move on to, for example, making coherent political arguments. Today, however, we've got it exactly backwards. Instead of teaching third graders their multiplication tables, we're teaching them to express themselves. Instead of teaching high schoolers logic, we encourage them to share their opinion on every subject as long as it aligns with our opinion, and that anyone who challenges them is a threat.
Let's go on. Someone read that next quote by Richard Gamble. By the way, he taught it.
I know him.
He teaches at Hillsdale
I had
College.
him as a professor.
He was at my seminary before he came here.
Really?
I have his signature on both of my diplomas from RTS. And I saw him here and I went, wow! Someone read that quote by Richard Gamble. This is a great book, by the way.
It is beyond argument that a man who has never been instructed in philosophy or in any branch of learning is a creature quite inferior to the brute animals. Animals only follow their natural instincts, but man, unless he has experienced the influence of learning and philosophy, is at the mercy of the impulses that are worse than those of a wild beast. There is no beast more savage and dangerous than a human being who is swept along by the passions of ambition, greed, anger, envy, extravagance, and sensuality. Therefore, a father who does not arrange for his son to receive the best education at the earliest age is neither a man himself nor has any fellowship with human nature. Wow.
Thoughts!
He's just saying it as he feels it.
Do you agree with him?
Well, if you don't know how to teach any more than what you are, you can't teach them better than what you are. So,
But in the beginning, parents were the teachers.
Yeah.
And now the parents don't have a right to their child. The government's taking that over now. In some states, it's really scary.
Well, and even, I mean, you can tell among the parents that want to, whatever the best is that they can give for their children, or the ones that just want them out of their hair as much as possible. Because that's, to me, that's the heart of the issue here, is whether or not you're trying to invest in trying to improve your child's life as much as you're capable versus you don't really hear nothing.
What is the necessity of making sure that they get a good education according to Richard Gamble?
Getting the basics in place.
What's the necessity of having the basics in place?
so you're not as inferior as a brute animal.
Why? Why
They
would,
basically function in society.
okay?
So you know, have the ability to
You
think.
can tell the difference.
Yeah, to think, to be able to discern what is my basic impulse and animalistic desire, and what is the higher good.
What is that? Yeah, how to put that down.
Yes. And folks, most people don't even ask that question. They just respond and do what they want to do. The question about what's the right thing to do doesn't even cross their mind. And this is what Richard Gamble is really trying to get us to understand. You've got to train that child to think about what their base inclinations are and what the right thing, what the noble thing is to do, and how am I going to evaluate my choice of making a decision in this matter with these two competing impulses going on inside of me. It's one of the reasons why the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4 encourages the people that are, he's just reprimanded for arguing back and forth in the first verse of chapter 4. He wants them to think about all things that are beautiful, all things that are noble, all things that are of good report. Why? Because they're resorting back to their base instinct of, well, you offended me, I'll offend you. I mean, he talks about, I think it's two women that are arguing with each other. Sorry. But and he's trying to get them to realize this is not the way Christians should respond. Thoughts?
The middle of his quote there, the idea that there's no beast more savage and dangerous. Okay, so here you've got, I think of human beings that are greedy, angry, envious, as, you know, that's their personality and that's, you know, it's, but I don't think I've ever wrap my head around the idea that they're actually dangerous humans.
Oh,
And that makes a lot of sense.
Jan, I am so glad that the God of the universe didn't wire a monitor to my brain that showed everybody what crossed my brain. I can relate to my granddaughter when she says, black, well, that's like my soul. Because things that have crossed my mind to do are way beyond dangerous. They're sinister. Now, maybe none of you have wrestled with those kind of issues, but all of my life, I've had these inclinations cross my mind, and I am grateful that I had parents that taught me to fight against those natural inclinations and to do what is right, because if I did what I wanted to do, these people that take their car and drive down the sidewalks of busy places and take out 40 or 50 people at a time, that's crossed my mind.
Not because you wanted to do it, but it's crosses your mind that, I wonder what would happen if I did this, right?
It's power.
Yeah.
I can have control over all those people. And all sorts of things have crossed my mind. If you want to take out a city, I have 50 ways to do it.
Don't share. Just don't do it to Hillsdale.
Listen, if I was a terrorist, I'd be their main man. Because...
Oh dear, if you're not here Sunday. They're coming to get him.
And that's the dangerous part about human creativity. That's the dangerous part about our human inclination to take dominion. All of those things given us by God. That's the dangerous part about wanting to have power, which was given to us by God. Being made in His likeness and His image. But that's what happens when it becomes corrupted and unrestrained. And that's what happens when we follow our base inclinations and don't have the Spirit of God that's reining us in and pulling us back. That's why I every time Lacey says something about her dark soul, in my mind I'm going, yeah, I know. I understand that. I don't always agree with her, but she got it honestly.
Yeah.
It skipped a generation, but...
Goodness.
And listen, if you tried to think sinisterly, like C.S. Lewis did with the Screwtape letters, you could devise a way to be really, 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 really bad, dangerous. The wonderful thing is that all of you have been wonderfully trained not to go there. But there are hundreds of thousands of people in this world that have not been wonderfully trained, and they do go there.
Think about the October 7th deal, when the kids are calling their mom and telling them that they just raped and murdered people, and the mother is encouraging them. Oh, great, that's wonderful. What?
Oh my word.
What is this?
Oh, that's unfortunately that's Palestinian mentality.
Okay, yes, you're right.
Oh.
You're right, when they're killing Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and they get awards for it.
Yep. They even award children for killing Jews.
And then they want to slash war crimes on Israel's prime minister because they fought back.
Well, I'm not going to solve those problems, but I do know that left unrestrained and without the Spirit of Christ, human beings are a lot more dangerous than any lion or tiger or bear. Oh my.
I always, and everybody here knows this, if you got kids, you always told your kids that you'll never have to teach your kids to be bad. You better teach them good. Because Matthew just a few months ago, he said, Dad, he's got a little 3-year-old Jack, precious little kid, but he can be really nasty sometimes. You remember me telling you, Matt? You aren't going to have to teach him to be bad, but you're going to have to teach him to be good. And he does. I mean, he does it, but it's just, I just can't understand why he does it. Because it's born right in him, buddy.
Exactly. Exactly. We have to understand that about ourselves, and that's why education is so crucially important, that we're educating moral character and what it means to be a noble human being, and not just how to... Listen, folks, we're coming to you. Sorry.
Actually, I think as a parent, and I didn't do this I did a little, we should pay very big attention to the teachers that our children have.
Oh, wow.
We should go into the classroom and view them and know what their values are and how they teach.
I think you're exactly
and
right.
what they teach. And if we don't do that, then we're subjecting our child to an entire year of that teacher.
And their values.
Right, who might not share your values.
Exactly.
So all people out there with little kids, get to the classroom.
So the video probably didn't pick that up, but all parents of little children should know what their teacher's values are, Lacey. So if a parent comes in and wants to observe your class, be flattered.
Welcome them.
And if they don't, as a parent, we're getting much more. 3 decades ago,
We didn't worry about
almost
it.
everybody had the same values that you did. But that is not the case now, and it's in the news that there's more and more schools that won't permit parents to come in to the school building. And I mean, that sounds like a pretty red flag. I think we're not gonna put our kids in there either if I can't come.
Then we need to go to the school board.
Yes, you're right.
We need to have
Yeah.
outs and we need to stick to our views too.
Or you need to vote for Matthew Gordon for Hillsdale School Board.
Is he
He's
running?
running for school board?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Whoa, cool. Good for
Yeah, that's
him.
right. Good job, Tom. Go for it.
If he wants insider information, to have him talk to Jean. Jean was on. Jean,
You won't
2
run.
3 years?
5.
5 years? Wow. She was on for 5 years.
Oh.
In Addison.
I never talked to her after a meeting. I went to bed.
And I wouldn't go to bed after every meeting.
That's why I went to bed.
I know one of his big issues, and Steph is,
Safer.
they've got a daughter that's going to Davis Middle School next year, and her, Steffi went and observed all the kids with cell phones at the school and just drove her nuts.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons, because they even asked the principal about it, and she said, I know, we don't know what to do.
Make a policy.
Yeah, go to
And
Carlton and
enforce
find
it.
out.
Well, I was gonna say, like, we were just talking about it and like all the high school teachers were in agreement. We're like, this is such a blessing. Like, we're like, we don't think about it because we're busy with everything else, but like, everyone not having their phone on them is such a blessing.
Well, Carl,
for
they're
everyone.
blessing
Yeah.
officers.
Yeah.
They-
Yeah, you get suspended if your phone is on.
Don't they put them in when they come to
Basket.
school, put them in the
Basket,
yeah.
Yep, and from my knowledge, we've never had issues with it.
No,
unless-
because they don't have them. And well, the valedictorian and the principal's children get suspended just like anybody else would.
Jody forgot to Lacey forgot to remove her phone one time, and
After
as
a
she's
college
going
class.
into the office to hand it in, her
After
phone
she
rang.
Busted.
Yeah, busted.
I didn't have any tests that day.
They moved it for you.
Let's go ahead and dock out of 120, about third paragraph at the end. In the 1980s, 90s, educational institutions in the United States made a nearly united effort to eliminate all moral values from educational process. The thinking was, who are we to communicate values to another human being? What do you think Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, and Richard Gamble would say in response to this reason for eliminating moral values from the educational process? Lacey, let us know what Aristotle and Plato would think.
That you're devaluing human, you're pretty much lowering yourself to lower than human if you act that way, because there's a universal good that we should aim to.
Good. So that's what Aristotle and Plato think. We've gotten it from an expert. Thoughts?
Well, I don't understand why they would devalue just moral values.
Whose values? That's the question.
Well, does anyone go along with stealing?
Some do.
Oh, I see what you mean. Why anybody would be against
I'm not necessarily
it.
talking about Christian values here.
But that's the thing. I mean, that's
Stealing is a Christian value.
Huh?
That's one of the 10 Commandments, is
But
do not steal.
Well, I get that, but I mean,
Why
do we
would
want
anybody be
any?
against it?
Yeah, a set of parents who are non-Christian, do they still want their kids stealing?
Survival of the fittest.
Does it all go back to that?
Don't
It
get
re-
caught.
Well, yeah.
It was really interesting to live through that because our kids were still in school when that whole values clarification things came up.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that very question came in my mind. These values are things you don't want to uphold, but they were so against any religious influence coming into the school system that there were people that actually said, I'd be willing to promote stealing rather than promote religion. And that's why they were pulling out. Now that was a very, very small sliver of the people that were fighting this, but it was one of the things that was fueling the whole movement.
And it took off. The values clarification, I remember years ago when I was in school and stuff, and it was like, and all of a sudden, okay, if the majority of the class thinks this behavior is okay, or thinks that's the answer to the question, then that's the answer to the question. Whatever the majority thinks is that's values clarification. You go along with whatever the majority thinks. And I'm just going, wait, and there were, but there were people who felt that that's what they were pushing at one point. And I'm just going, how can that be?
And how long have you been retired, Phyllis?
Since what? I don't remember.
Like
7 years.
Okay, 7?
7.
Oh, that's not very long. Okay, my point is, any teacher in a classroom tries to maintain some kind of an order over these munchkins. Tries to, and
Some do.
if they have no moral values, how are they can't do it?
That's a great question.
That's actually changing though, because Fred got knocked down on his evaluation this year because his classroom was too structured. That his neighboring teacher, it's like chaos in the room. There's people all over different sections of the room doing what they want, and she is praised because she's letting all the students learn in their own. And
That's sick.
yeah, he has to get evaluated in 2 years instead of 3 just because he had too much order.
Well, what we would do is allow students to make up rules for the classroom, is what you do. And then they
Oh.
have to stick to the rules.
And your little bitty ones did that? Or
Well,
would this be the
this
upper
would
grades?
be in
Those
elementary,
who
higher up.
maybe had learned to
But-
think a little bit. Okay.
But then you would not expect a whole room to say, no, we can't do that. Some would say that, and then others would listen. So it doesn't, and then
I
as
see.
a teacher, I could say, well, would you like someone to go to your desk and steal all your crayons? Oh, wait, no, I don't want them in my desk.
But I'll take my neighbors.
So, no, I don't want anybody doing that. So then that might be a rule. You don't get in other people's desks.
Uh-huh.
You don't touch other people's things.
Uh-huh. See, I'm curious how, and you teach in a better environment.
I would believe so, yes.
Yes, I'm just interested in how the public school teachers are getting through each day now. Even in this neighborhood.
According
which
to
will
test
be-
scores are not. The test scores continue to decline. Have over the last, 20, 30 years, I think.
There's some young teachers in this church that the last few years, they've had 2 or 3, 4 kids in their room that are special needs that just totally disrupt the class all day, every day, and they have no way to pull them in. So there's very little, the teacher's very little ability to teach the kids that can learn, because those few, are so disruptive, and there's no, at least what I've heard her say is the administration supports, we're not gonna do anything to get these kids messed up, we're gonna let them, and the teacher's the one that's being reprimanded. And there's nothing she can do, because she can't control the order in the classroom. And it's been extremely stressful for her,
Yeah.
trying to teach.
I couldn't teach in a public school now. I just couldn't. But I'm too discipline oriented, and I'd be fired or probably put in jail.
Before class started.
More than likely. Before the first week was out, for sure. I'm serious.
I understand. I'm just,
That's not all
Just-
of them, a lot of them are in great shape. But it's just that there are.
and many times those special needs children, I know, have an aide to be working with them all the time.
They have
Or should be.
IFSPs or
Yeah.
IEPs.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I was in special ed too, so.
Yeah.
If they're evaluated and they need it, but I know they've turned away from supplying more help because of the cost. But we don't pay our teachers.
okay. Well, we can go on.
We're going, let's skip ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and read this quote on the top of 121, the long one that's by C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man. Actually, Lacey, if you could read that, it's a long one, I know, but it.
Yeah, okay. I do see the last one, but I'll go through it.
Okay, great.
St. Augustine defines virtue as ordo amoris, the ordinate condition of affections in which every object is accorded that kind of degree of love which is appropriate to it. Aristotle says that the aim of education is to make the people like and dislike what they ought. When the age of reflective thought comes, the pupil who has been thus trained in ordinate affections or just sentiments will easily find the first principles in ethics. But to the corrupt man they will never be visible at all, and he can make no progress in that science. Plato before him had said the same. The little human animal will not at first have the right responses. It must be trained to feel pleasure, liking, disgust, and hatred at those things which really are pleasant, likable, disgusting, and hateful. In the Republic, the well-nurtured youth is the one who would see most clearly whatever was amiss in ill-made works of man or ill-grown works of nature, and with a just distaste would blame and hate the ugly even from his earliest years, and would give delight of praise to beauty, receiving it into his soul and being nourished by it, so that he becomes a man of gentle heart. All this before he is of an age to reason, so that when reason at length comes to him, then, bred as he has been, he will hold out his hands and welcome and recognize her because of the affinity he bears her.
Now, the big thing that C.S. Lewis is promoting here, using Augustine as a kind of launching pad, is that we need to train people to recognize what's good and be delighted in that, and recognize that which is evil and be disgusted at that. And that we need to condition them in a way that would allow them to recognize what's good and what's evil and have the appropriate response. That is anathema today. That is to be cursed today, because you're not supposed to be influencing people on how they evaluate what they should like and what they should dislike, what they should be attracted to, what they should find disgusting or appalling. That's why we have such a huge range of values today, is that people have been allowed to pursue whatever they want to pursue, even to the point of saying, if I'm a cat, please have a litter box in the back for me to use so I can go to the bathroom. Plato would go, that's lunacy. Aristotle would say the same thing. Augustine would say the same thing. You need to teach that young person what's right. You need to teach that person what's evil, and give them that kind of, which one's right? The current way of thinking, or Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, and Moses' way of thinking. Because Moses makes a real clear plea to train up our children in the way they should go. The writer of Proverbs says that, but this Deuteronomy 6, and let me read this for you. It's right after this. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Bind them on your foreheads. Write them in the door frames of your houses and on your gates. There is no wiggle room for your own personal interpretation of what's disgusting or pleasing, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil. God is saying, this is good, this is evil. Train your kid to see this. And Plato, Aristotle, Augustine would all agree. Thoughts?
Just looking at the question right after the paragraph about like what is the reason we must do this before they have reason. I think we have discussed like the use of reason in our nature.
Okay, good.
Although it is a blessing and it makes us who we are, it can be a huge detriment because we can explain anything.
Absolutely.
So if we have the desire just for ourselves for survival and to be against everyone else, then when we have reason, and if we can use reason well, then we can defend anything we want to. So we need to have our desires in the right places.
Oh, Lacey, you are speaking volumes of truth that has unbelievable rabbits jumping out everywhere.
And it ties into what's been said tonight, earlier too.
And folks, one of the things I've discovered since going to seminary is the brighter the person and the more they're able to use reason, the more they can justify any action, all the way to Alinsky, Saul Alinsky. I read that book and said, how can anybody think this way? But he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and has influenced huge numbers of people to make huge culture changes. But it's all sinister and evil. It's, yeah.
So, what was the number one thing then that happened in our society that makes us turn from what we know is right for everything into what we want to have freedom to bring in all the things that are not good?
I'm not sure I could point to one. I could point to a lot. Do you have one you think is paramount?
Yeah.
Probably the biggest is just saying no to God and his values and saying yes to myself. Making man the measure of all things, which is Heraclitus. One of those early Greek philosophers about 800 BC said that man is the measure of all things. When Plato and Aristotle came along and said, that's a bunch of hooey.
So a major in our culture historical event that started a big turn in that direction was when prayer was taken out of school.
You could make a case for that. Yeah.
I think there are numerous things that have compiled together.
Yeah.
And I think education had something to do with it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the more people pondered education above what was right, the more they thought they should be able to allow people to think for themselves instead of teaching them what to think.
Oh, Phyllis, you've really put your finger on the pulse. That is the mantra for today. You need to allow kids to think for yourself. That's wonderful for a kid that's been taught what's right and what's wrong and given the ability to think properly. That's a wonderful thing to do. Not for a first grader who has no clue.
They're not the age of reason yet.
No! And that's what Plato, Aristotle, and Augustine are beating into us to try to get us to realize. For those formative years, from age 1 to age 10 or 11 or 12, you need to teach them what's right. We need to teach them what's wrong. You need to teach them what's beautiful. You need to teach them what's ugly. You need to teach them what's good. We need to teach them what's evil. And not allow them to think for themselves until they know how to think first. Because if you think for themselves, they're going to default to that base nature that Phyllis talked about a good 45 minutes ago. And that's disaster. That's dangerous to allow them to start thinking in the base nature. That's worse than an animal at that point. Thoughts?
I think a lot of what's happened to our culture is they started calling us that we weren't loving. And,
oh, yeah, sure.
I mean, we used to point out things, you can't do that. And then they started calling us names and we backed off.
Yeah, we
because
did.
We didn't want them to think bad of us.
We did.
Instead
I
of,
think-
Too many rules, too many
I think what,
restrictions, too many.
to me, it was when we were told that we could not say anything to somebody that was offensive.
yeah. And we took it.
So, yeah, and so everybody said, okay, I can't say anything because I'll be in trouble for saying something to you that was offensive to you, because that might hurt your psyche.
Might hurt
Yeah,
your
sure
feelings.
will. It might give
Well,
you
it's
a
kinda like turning
lobotomy
the
and
cheek.
switch you around,
Censorship.
What is the one thing we can look at to know that just because we say something that offends something doesn't mean we're wrong? What can give us fuel to be able to say things that may offend somebody and still have confidence that we should say it?
Bible.
They're
Well,
lining up with the Bible.
Yeah, specifically, who in the Bible?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah, listen, they put Jesus on a cross not because they liked him. They found him deeply offensive.
It was.
Deeply
In
offensive.
fact, the disciples, after Jesus yells at them, they go, I don't think they like that, what you said.
And Jesus goes, duh.
Wow.
That's not in the scriptures. It's in the Greek. Listen, Jesus was deeply offensive because he saw the depravity of human nature, saw the sinfulness of man, and knew that we should be living better than this, knew that we should have a better life than this, but we were allowing ourselves to live as animals. And he go, no, no, no. You need to kill that old man. You need to kill your sinful nature. You need to live as I'm living, which was a sacrificial life.
I think it's good to keep in mind, though, that Jesus was very offensive to the church people, but not to the sinful crowds.
Well, he told the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more.
Considering she was just getting ready to get stoned and he prevented her death, I think that was a very loving thing to do.
Oh, sure.
But I mean, he showed love and then he taught the lesson. He didn't.
Good.
He didn't do it because he blasted the Pharisees.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
never see him coddling them, and so I think that's good for us to remember that we need to show more grace.
Yeah. Probably the amount of blast is proportional to
Yes.
the amount of education the person has received prior to that, in which they should know better.
Yes.
I would agree with that.
How this conversation is going at the moment just kind of reminds me of the idea that people like to think of God as love, Jesus as love, doing nice things, he loves you, but they don't want to think of the God that is just. And, and so I think that it's a little bit of that's where our culture, our society
Absolutely.
has, within the Christian churches, they're trying to preach how loving God is and not want to touch on any of the fire and brimstone and wrath that God has.
We've made a huge error in thinking that being loving is being nice.
Yeah.
They are not equal.
But I think
Sometimes
exactly
being
Phyllis's
loving-
idea in question, that's part of it too, one of the puzzle pieces that's gotten us to.
Sometimes being loving is disciplining the person that is destroying their lives and destroying themselves because they're in complete rebellion against the God of the universe. One of the things that I keep pointing to with certain people is that God disciplines the ones he loves. It comes in Proverbs, it comes in Hebrews chapter 12. And if you see somebody destroying their lives because of a sinful behavior and an ungodly attribute, and you don't say anything, you cannot say you love them. If they're destroying themselves and you do nothing, don't say you love them. You need to be involved in their lives and try to correct them and try to get them on the path that is honoring of God and following God's ways, or they're never going to be able to have the abundant life that Jesus is trying to get us to have. But it only comes by being obedient. One of the things we're going to look at later on, if we haven't already, we're created in God's likeness and image. There's another thing that's created in God's likeness and image too. The law of God.
The law of God?
The law of God. is a reflection of God's values and a reflection of who God is. If we're ever going to be able to live up to being in God's image and likeness, we need to be obedient to the law of God. They're all part of the same formula. Does it make sense at all what I'm saying? The law of God is based on the image of God. We're based on the image of God. If we don't bring those together, we'll never be people reflecting God's image and likeness if we're disobedient to the law of God, which is God's image and likeness.
Well, how do you define the law of God more than the
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus,
okay,
Deuteronomy.
all those law books. Okay.
Actually, there's places where the Apostle Paul uses the law of God to mean the entire Bible. Now, he doesn't mean the New Testament, but I do. Because I think if Paul were alive today, he would include the New Testament as well.
It's basically the Ten Commandments, only
Sure.
expounded.
Sure.
Expanded.
With keeping in mind loving God and loving others as the overriding principle of them all. And because I feel that's what the New Testament brings to
Whoa!
brings
Good
to the Old
for
Testament,
you.
is because the New Testament emphasizes that you gotta do that stuff with love, or what's the point?
Yeah, Jesus himself said, you need to love God, love your neighbor. All the law and the prophets are filled with those two commandments. Ooh, this is, hopefully this is coalescing in your mind,
But see,
because this
that
is
right there,
huge.
that phrase, to love God, our culture now is interpreting that, just like we were saying before, as being nice to them.
Oh yeah, I
That our
agree.
culture does not include disciplining them as a part of loving them.
Because you're not allowed to think the way you want to think if you discipline someone. You're trying to get them forced to think the way God is asking them to think, which is exactly what Christian maturity is.
And we've had this discussion with people that think they're cats. If you're a loving parent, are you going to let your kid grow up thinking he's a cat? How's he ever going to get a job? You know, how's he ever going to live on his own? That is not the loving thing to do, to let them think that.
And we have a lot of parents that think it is. We have a lot of administrators and politicians and doctors that think it is. And I'm going, oh, this is insanity. Thoughts?
The books that I've been reading lately here, the 40s and 50s was everything was sort of legalism.
Yes.
And the Jesus movement that came in the 60s brought him out of the ditch, but pushed him over in the other ditch.
That's the problem.
because you're talking about, because it's, you know, a loving God wouldn't do that. And we've left out the holiness of God. And now I think there's a movement, I really feel there's a movement within the church, not all churches, but most churches, that we need to get back to holiness, because and the devil says, oh, that's, you can't obtain that, so don't even try to do that. And people will believe that, because a lot of people say, well, I can't be holy. Well, you can, because God says you can. So find out how to do it, you know?
Well, you'll never get there if, and even
Right.
never make
No, I
any
don't think
progress
you're
if
gonna
you don't
attain
try.
it, but doesn't mean you don't try. God-
Exactly.
Be on the right
Jesus
path,
says,
though.
God said, I'm holy, so therefore you be holy.
That's
So
right.
there's gotta be a way somewhere. And
Right.
And it's growing in that, so.
Good.
I think that there's a movement within the church, I think even within this church, just with a men's group up here, these guys wanting to be, seeing that, you know, it's just, there's more to it, and I told them on this, you got pulled out of the one ditch, and now you got shoved in the other ditch, and you gotta get back in the middle of the road
Right.
to find out, because the road is narrow. It's
You know, you've done a good job of summing up the last 80 years of
Yeah.
church history.
We saw Carolyn Fuller the other day, and we're, you know, just talking about whatever, but she said, oh, there is a revival happening here in Hillsdale. You know, not necessarily in any of the particular churches, but individually within the homes, within their small groups getting together all over. And she says it's not an official movement, but there is a spiritual movement of God that's even very, very present here in Hillsdale County. That's an undertone kind of thing.
Well,
It's called-
God has set up Hillsdale County for that to happen.
Very possibly.
I really think the last 20 years of watching God move in Hillsdale County, He's put people in place that are instrumental to make that happen.
Neat.
Yeah, I think we're a privileged county. I really do. That because God has put a lot of godly men in this county that you could go to a lot of counties in Michigan and not find one godly man that's a pastor. There's 8 or 9 in this county that are really, really, really good pastors. That are good men and have got a heart for God and are seeking holiness. Yeah, let's go on. 122, right in about 60% of the way down, as Stephen Miller. Someone read that paragraph.
As Stephen Mueller, president of Johns Hopkins, put it, the universities may be producing a generation of highly skilled barbarians.
Why would that be the case?
Because we live in a very materialistic world, and universities, one of the first questions is, what are you preparing to do when you get out? The materialistic view. What is your major to prepare you for work instead of prepare you for thinking? Prepare you
How would that create a highly skilled barbarian?
You don't care about people.
Okay, good. And we don't care about people because we've not been taught to care about people. We've not been taught the values that God says are instrumental in order for us to guide our education and to guide our use of our education towards... Listen, folks, the most highly developed nation in the world in the 1930s and 40s was Nazi Germany. They had the best educational system in the world, way above everybody else. What did they do with it?
Well, look at all these people rioting and barricading themselves and stuff on universities. They're taught that that's okay, and then they do things that are against the rules, and then they get let off for doing it. You know,
we're not encouraging them.
Yeah, they're learning to be barbarians.
Other thoughts? Just because you have an education does not mean you're going to use it for good. You can use that education for evil just as much as you can use it for good. The only reason you're going to use it for good is if you've been taught to use it for good. If you default to your instinct and your natural way of thinking, you'll use your education for survival of the fittest. What will promote me, what will get me the most money and the most power and the most position.
Well, if you watch many of the commercials today, I talked about this one time about the one lady that said, I just want to get what I'm entitled to.
Oh, wow.
I just hate that commercial. It's like, you are entitled to nothing.
Yeah. So that comes out in a lot of different...
It does, it really does.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about brainwashing people. See, that's right, I am entitled to this.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, let's go on. Where do we? No, we don't want to do that one. Let's go to the middle of 123. The human heart was. Somebody read that paragraph.
The human heart was deemed to be in need of instruction in moral uprightness. There needed to be a renewing of the mind. Today, however, such sentiment has been angrily and mockingly denounced in academia, laden down by our technology. We crawl up to our halls of fame like Alexander, desperately wanting the world to believe that we too are immortal. How revealing it is that in the bloodiest century of history, we deny human depravity. The relativism of ancient Greece has worked its way into modern America through the Greek philosophers themselves, even in their day, warned that relativism would be suicidal. To her credit, early America knew that this was not merely a philosophical problem, as real as that was. This was a problem of the soul, and the heart of humanity was in need of redemption.
Thoughts? What's Ravi Zacharias saying? Please do not dismiss this quote because Ravi Zacharias was shown to be an idiot. He did have some great things to say. Even a broken clock is twice a day correct. Why is relativism suicidal?
Because there's no truth.
Okay, why would that make it suicidal?
You can't hold up what is good and denounce what is evil.
Okay, good. Why would that make it suicidal?
When everybody treats everybody the way you're treating everybody, you're going to get treated that way too.
Okay.
eventually.
What else? What reigns in a culture if there's no absolute truth? Nothing!
Yeah.
Nothing! There are no restraints.
Everyone does what is right in their own eyes.
Listen, that phrase in the book of Judges is huge. Because it points to the man as a measure of all things, which is the suicidal approach that the Greek philosophers understood was horrible. The founding fathers of this nation understood that it was horrible. But unfortunately, here in the last 20, 30 years, we've adopted that we're the measure of all things. We can determine what's right and wrong for ourselves. We can think for ourselves. We can do what we want to do. Folks, that is suicide. It's the beginning, the end of that culture when that happens. Thoughts?
Do you think part of our problem is we're so sheltered? Because, seriously.
I think you're right.
Because I don't think we have any idea, like the things you're mentioning earlier, most people don't even want to hear about them, let alone acknowledge that they've happened in recent days, and because it's just there's so much evil that has happened over the human history that we want to ignore, and not, if we acknowledge it, then we want to fight against it.
How can a person that's a liberal, who agrees with abortion, agrees with transgenderism, agrees with homosexuality, agrees with all those kind of things, support Hamas? When if they were living in a nation controlled by Hamas, they would be executed.
Because they're too ignorant to dig into it enough to know what Hamas does.
And I think you're right, Jody. How many times this week have I said, well, that's a first world problem? What do I mean by that?
Because most people in the world don't even know that kind of a problem exists. Because they're so low social not gonna.
Transgenderism is not a third world problem.
Yeah.
Right.
It is not a third world problem.
Not an option.
That's not an option.
Medically, financially, socially, that is not an option, so why would we even consider it? It is a first world problem. We've got a big problem with it. And
if they were paying for their own operations,
Oh, my
it would
goodness.
not be a first world problem either, because the government is paying for drugs for the rest of their life and multiple surgeries.
And the people that run in the government are getting the money in their pocket.
Yep.
well, I bet 3 times in the last 4 days,
Yeah.
I've said to Gene, well, that's a first world problem. And I'm just, Jody, I think you've hit the problem. We're just so spoiled. We're just so sheltered. We're just so prosperous. I come back to the prayer that Abraham Lincoln initiated on April 30th, 1863. And if you read that prayer, that he called for a national day of prayer and repentance for the people of the Union, because we were in the Civil War, he says in that prayer, Lord, we've become arrogant. We've become so self-assured that we're prosperous because of our own means. We're living high on the hog because of all the things we've done, that we've become self-assured and forgotten you. And that's our demise, that we've forgotten you. And boy, that prayer just echoes where I think we are today. And we don't have a president with enough guts or with enough sense to be able to call for that prayer again, but we desperately need it. Abraham Lincoln was spot on when he put his finger on the problem on April 30th, 1863. That was a national day of prayer that he called for.
This came through, I don't do anything on Facebook, but Melissa sent this, my daughter, to us. And she's talking about that there's a 26-year-old girl wrote this article, and she said, we have a problem. And the problem is that the younger generation, her generation, is blind to how prosperous we are in our country.
Yeah.
And how we keep complaining about things, how is it? I'm sitting in a small coffee shop in Florida trying to think of what to write about. I scroll through the news feed on my phone looking at the latest headlines of the presidential candidates calling to fix the so-called injustices of capitalism. And then, she's talking, really, we don't even realize how well off we are because we're so spoiled.
We are incredibly spoiled.
And she just goes on with examples of how that whole generation is.
Churches that do missionary trips to third world nations, I'm willing to support that as much as I possibly can, because that is an opportunity for people to get their eyes open to what the rest of the world lives like. And folks, we're so spoiled. We have so many things we take for granted.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I used to be able to look to and feel confident and didn't even think about it was that I would live in a place where justice was promoted. But folks, what's happened over the last 2 years in our justice system, I'm not sure I feel that way anymore. I'm scared spitless that one of these videos is going to fall in the wrong hands and I'll be prosecuted and put in jail. I'm really glad I live in Hillsdale County because it's not likely to happen here. But some person have a vendetta against what I have to say.
Yeah, it's happening here.
Just remember, you got the rest of the book. You can go on your own. We need to call it quits. We'll start with Romans 12:2 on June 7th, 1 week from today. Because this is the fifth Friday, and we meet the first, third, and fifth, we will be meeting next Friday as well. So, what's the matter?
I won't be here next week.
It's Chuck E. Cheese?
No, Fred and I have a date night. Can we go too? Nope. Our last Broadway show for the season.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that phrase.
So Lacey's going to record?
I guess so. I was going to ask her.
I'm all right with it.
Closing comments before we dismiss.
I'm curious, what is the width of that camera?
You're not
About
in
here to here.
It's sitting over there like this.
It's however narrow or wide
I got to
that it is to
thinking,
the next
after the last
person.
class, I'm thinking, oh no, I might have been on.
No, you were.
Film.
I always zoom in if people get closer.
Okay.
About this,
That's why
my
I
arm
sit
length.
2 seats over from him.
Yeah, that's why Gene sits there.
Okay.
If you sit too close, I'll just zoom in. You're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this group. Thank you for your word. And Father, as disastrous sometimes as it is, thank you for creating us in your likeness and your image so that we could have a relationship with you. Father, forgive us when we pervert and distort and corrupt that image. Help us to look to Jesus. Help us to look to your law. Help us to look to the church. Help us to seek your spirit so that we can once again be men and women created in your likeness and your image. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you.